Alrighty, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining today's Partner Solutions session titled Strategic Sponsorships Align Members with Chamber's New Mission. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few very quick housekeeping items. First of all, this is an express session lasting about 20 minutes with 5 to 10 minutes of transition time to allow you to get to the next track of Partner Solutions sessions. These begin at 2:30. All attendees will be muted for the duration of the session, so please use the chat if you have any comments or questions for our speakers. We will use the last 5 minutes for Q&A, and we'll take as many questions as we have time for in the chat. This session is being recorded and will be available tomorrow on the event site. Please feel free to share with your colleagues who may not have been able to attend. Without further ado, I will hand things over to our friend, Jason Eby, the CEO of YGM Total Resource Campaigns, to kick off today's presentation. Jason?
Thanks so much, Ellie. It's great to be here. We're just going to get to it. You know, they keep us to a tightrope. So without any introductions that y'all can read and all of these things, we just want to kind of start to talking about strategic sponsorships and how they can be used to really further your organizations. And so when they gave us this opportunity, ACCE, we just knew our good friends at the Greater Pensacola Chamber were the right ones to tell you their story. So I'm going to kick it off to Jessica Simpson, the vice president there, and let her really start with the issues that they were experiencing when we first connected some odd years ago. So Jessica, go ahead.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you. So my role here in this webinar is to give you a picture of who we were when we were lost children. But we looked a lot like chambers today look. We were a chamber that had the Tourism Development Council and the Economic Recruitment Agency within our umbrella. So we got a lot of government funding, and we had a lot of staff people, and we had essentially multiple pockets of work that we did. So that's who we've been since our creation. However, in 2015, we split from those two agencies, and they became their own independent organizations. And that left us with the sole role in the community of actual chamber work. So small business networking, focusing on the local business community, and essentially being the connector and the convener for business to business, and certainly business to public officials, advocacy, things like that. So when I started just after that split happened, my biggest issue with who we were was not necessarily who we were. I knew what we did, but how we did it. So we needed some organization. We needed some revenue. So I'm sure you can all agree that you need. We needed to beef up our retention numbers, and we needed to beef up our member engagement numbers. So our chamber in the past had done a membership drive, and the consensus from our board was that did not go well. It was not a positive experience for us, and we needed to focus more on our existing members and what they paid outside of their member dues. So what they paid in non-dues revenue, we needed to beef that up, which obviously, is our revenue. But also we needed organization. So we found ourselves dreaming up events, searching for sponsorships 3 to 4 weeks before the event took place, whether it be by email requests or phone call lists, or just postal mailing requests for sponsorships. And then once that event was over, we started on the next event in 3 to 4 weeks, drumming up sponsorships for that, a lot of it coming from the same companies. So we had a lot of needs, being that we had really figured out who we were, and we needed organization, funding, and member engagement to come together in a nice little package. And we did a lot of research, looked at a lot of things that chambers did, looked at the chamber industry as a whole to see what really worked. And I found that something called a total resource campaign could probably serve all those needs. And so I met with my board, pulled together an advisory committee, and we contacted Jason. So that's kind of where we were and the issues that we faced before we took on our first TRC.
And thus, TRC.
The picture you're looking for, Jason?
That was the picture. That was a great picture, actually. And, a lot of times people will say all of those things. And the crazy part about Total Resource Campaigns is while the name Total Resource Campaign is in there, quite frankly, everybody knows it as a sponsorship drive. You got your membership drives that you referenced over here. You've got your capital campaigns for either those buildings or maybe those long-term workforce initiatives or educations that typically take 3 to 5 years here. And so really what's left over and what the chamber typically does is a sponsorship drive. And that's where Total Resource falls in. And while that's kind of at the nucleus of what Total Resource Campaign is all about, it really goes to answer the questions that you have, and thus the total resources. You weren't just looking for money. You were looking for organizational strategies. You were looking for membership engagement. And honestly, through a TRC, through that sponsorship aspect, all of those come into alignment, because what we know, if we just watch humans work in the for-profit business sector of this world of capitalism that we have, we know that people that spend money are more engaged to any products that they buy, any companies that they have. I mean, that loyalty factor is huge. And that's why all of our corporations in America spend a lot of money dealing with loyalty. And so honestly, when you have members that haven't necessarily gone up and beyond their membership dues before, when they are reaching to components of your chamber to say, that's important to me because I finally see the chamber as a tool to grow my business, they become a lot more engaged through that process. Because what we find, and chambers all across the country, whether they have found themselves in a reorganizational time as you did, or maybe they're the chamber that has been the exact same way for a number of decades, what we typically find is there's a top percentage of members that typically are those sponsors or those top investors. And, depending on the chamber size, sometimes it kind of averages around 10%. But how do we as chambers get those transactional members that paid their membership but never kind of come to anything? ACC has taught us through the Horizon Initiative that only about 18 to 20% of our members are ever going to show up to anything, no matter what we create. So how do we get the engagement from that other 80%? Well, honestly, we can get them engaged by giving them more opportunities to purchase items. And when we purchase items, we talk a lot about sponsorship. And if I'm honest with you, and God, Jessica and Jenna, you're tired of me saying this. We've said it so much over the last few years of, I really wish we could rebrand sponsorships, because it's not just about giving money away, but that's the air that it carries because of our communities. And so if we begin to look at everything we do as the chamber as a product or service that we can offer to our clients who are our members to grow their business, then they get engaged. And through the TRC process, we have to find out what all of those items are from those events that we do, and kind of getting off that hamster wheel cycle to all the programs and initiatives that we do that sometimes we haven't had dollars put to that people could engage with. But when we look at that for the next 12 months, or as we did with y'all, even kind of planning out year 2 and year 3, kind of strategically in that process, we're able to find organization that makes it easier for us as chamber staff to kind of develop a program that makes it easier for us to execute because the plan's there, but it also makes it easier for our members to understand. Because when our members understand something and then they find the value in it, they engage in a far greater detail. And so through Total Resource Campaign, you not only get the dollars that comes from the membership engagement that they find all the more valuable because you've had an organizational structure and plan. But honestly, and I think you'll all agree with this, and I think, Jenna, this will be part of what you kind of mentioned here in just a minute, but it's the grassroots marketing aspect that you don't really, or you can't really put a dollar or number to in value. But when you have a number of business individuals talking about what the chamber's doing in a very concentrated time, that value is kind of immeasurable, even though you get measurable aspects on all those others. And so that is, I think, what they found in a Total Resource Campaign. And through that, of course, everything that we do as chambers is kind of measured by metrics and numbers. And So Jenna, who executed the campaign for us and continues to do so now 3 years later as they continue to grow, Jenna, kind of share about what those results were post your first one, and then kind of how you have continued that not only through COVID, but also a massive hurricane last year and those particular aspects. But what results have you found?
Sure. So our first TRC, we're about to start our third TRC here in October. So our first TRC, we typically raised about $60,000 in sponsorships before we started a TRC. And like Jessica mentioned, we were just sort of lost in what we were doing, searching for sponsorships 2-3 weeks out before an event. So a TRC campaign was vital for us, having that 6 to 8 weeks of a campaign to really search for these sponsors and just have that time to really solidify our sponsors and then really work towards their benefits. So our first TRC, we increased non-dues revenue by 300%. Raised about $240,000 in our first TRC. We also engaged about 80 new volunteers, so people that weren't necessarily engaged with the chamber before. So that also, of course, just gave us a new voice in the community and engaged a lot of different companies that we did not have before. And then also just something that has really helped us when we went into our second year was that Jason really taught us how to do a deep dive into our events. And we were able to build out benefits on our own now. So our first TRC, we created 12 new events. And he also showed us why things work, and we don't always have to do things the way that we always did them. So we basically rebuilt our events as well. So those were some really big, valuable things that Jason brought to us, really taught us how to do things differently, and we're able to build out events on our own, which led into our second year, which made Jason a really valuable tool for us as COVID hit and a hurricane hit when we went into our second COVID year with the TRC. We went into year 2 and increased our non-dues revenue after that by 34%. And then let me pull up a few more numbers for everybody. After both years combined, we've raised a total of $500,000 for our first 2 TRC campaigns. So we're super excited about that and can't wait to see what year 3 presents for us.
And I know those were a lot of numbers. And so if y'all were wanting to write them down or get them, y'all can hop over to our exhibitor booth. I just love to say hop over in this virtual world, you know. They have graciously created kind of an infographic for you all to kind of put all those into perspectives. And, you know, what I'll say is, in that kind of development of the way it should be. You know, a lot of times as chambers, we kind of get in that rut of doing the same thing over and over and over. But the process of looking at things differently and moving it, I mean, if COVID taught us anything, it taught us that we're going to have to be innovative and we're going to have to change. And so a lot of those processes is, you know, Jenna was talking about events. So many times we just go to those larger events that we all do, you know, expo and golf and annual meeting and those type of things. But really events can be tied to our programs and initiatives. They had a good, strong governmental affairs program, and we're looking to make it deeper. So they did some issue-driven luncheons. And so, yeah, they have the title of event because we're bringing people to a lunch and talking. But really, that's a program and initiative deep dive that you begin to start finding value and getting money with your issues and your programs and your initiatives in a way that we are used to with events, but it's kind of comparable when we're kind of talking about the non-tangible in all that the chamber does in that particular process. So with that, Ellie, questions?
Jessica, did you have a comment?
I was going to add to what Jason said. I can see a question in the chat that says, curious to hear an example of a new TRC event. And so Jason just talked about a luncheon that we created because our advocacy is a very strong piece of what we do. And so a way that we revamped and created new was we've always had a monthly breakfast that has a general community speaker, and there's networking, but just a general overall community speaker. So for instance, we took 4 of those breakfasts out and created a topic-focused luncheon. So we call it the State of series. So we do state of economy, state of the city, state of the government, state of healthcare, and every 3rd month, or essentially quarterly, instead of that monthly breakfast, there's a specific topic-focused luncheon that draws in the advocacy piece of what we know is so important to our community. So that's kind of an example. That State of series became a sponsorship sort of wagon for us, whereas it was just our small general networking breakfast. So we didn't get rid of that. We just sort of revamped a few of them to bring that new piece in.
And what I'd add to that with that question of new TRC events, it's part of that strategic sponsorship. When Jenna and Jessica and I were working, we worked months ahead of the campaign structure of raising dollars to look at what they were doing comprehensively for 12 months, and for them, even a couple of years forward. So it's about tying all of those together. We're working with a chamber right now in Alabama. They do 3 different educational events that really the sponsors were kind of the same. So sometimes it's not even creating something new, maybe just a consolidation of doing it smarter and more effective to raise those dollars. So it's kind of a comprehensive aspect in looking at it. How can it strategically work and align with your strategic plan and program of work?
Perfect. Thank you, Jason. And a question for you, Jason. Do you do informational presentations for boards for people interested in TRC campaigns so that they can make a decision?
All the time. Did 2 of them this morning.
I can answer that.
Yeah, I forgot how many we did. We did a number of them with Pensacola, because it's an aspect. You are changing the way you operate your chamber. And so in that aspect, it's not something to take lightly. It's not just a vote to say, oh, hey, let's have an expo, or hey, let's add this particular aspect. Your board has to understand what they're signing on for. Most of the time, we are not looking for boards to volunteer in these TRCs. Those are a different group of volunteers, but your board as your strategic governing body has to understand this process and understand what it means that the chamber is going to accept this and kind of start doing it year after year. And I'll kind of tie this into another question I see about tiered dues, because it works so great with tiered dues. Jessica and Jenna have tiered dues. They had them before we got there. And so it's in the process of, if you've got tiered dues, this works well alongside of it, because a lot of the times what's in the tiered dues is the non-tangible. It's the kind of marketing aspect of people just wanting to align with your chamber and align with your mission. Whereas the TRC components are everything that you can get dollar value on. And by bringing the competitive market that all of your businesses deal with day in and day out, you're able to kind of drive those costs up. So many times we get lost in, well, what do we price everything? 500, 1,000, 2,500, 5,000. Well, this allows us to really push those prices because our members are telling us what it's worth. So if you've got tiered dues, it's great to work alongside of it. If you are moving to tiered dues, it's great to work alongside of it. When we were working with the Tallahassee Chamber, they actually rolled out their tiered due structure through the TRC process. So they kind of aligned those as those were creating, but at the same time, even the fair share full-time employee model, it works great as well because you're finding those tangible aspects.
Perfect. One more for Jessica and Jenna. How did your volunteers respond to the TRC? They like working together and getting rewarded for their performance?
So our volunteers responded wonderfully to the TRC. Like I said, we recruited about 80 volunteers for the first year. I will tell you the response to the professional development is higher than the response to rewards. And just a quick example that I can give you is one of our highest performing volunteers actually said yes to the TRC because she wanted to get her face in front of the vice chair. She raised us like so much, like thousands of dollars, because she wanted to have that professional development piece in front of one of the vice chairs for networking purposes. So I would tell you that networking is probably the biggest sell when it comes to the volunteers. Rewards is a nice extra for them, and it's fun to be able to do those things. But having 80 new volunteers at our chamber is a great thing for us, and I think they'll come back and be retained because of that piece as well.
And I will add on that as we wrap up that it's an aspect of, I'm sure, I was a chamber, one of you watching these for over a decade. And so if you're interested in TRC and as you kind of scratch through and look at different peer groups and different chambers doing TRCs, that the volunteer model is always a question mark. And, you're going to hear some that are very trip heavy, very incentive heavy. But what I will tell you is the difference in a YGM TRC is that the focus is about professional development for those volunteers, business development opportunities. Those are the campaigns that for the long term last, and honestly, you continue to get higher and higher returns rather than just kind of reaching a plateau. If the TRC begins to be volunteer focused and the incentives that they get, honestly, most of the time you've gotten the wrong volunteers and you're not going to see significant growth out of that. So I know there's a lot of questions still. I'm sure we're going to be getting a copy of those and we'll try to reach out and address those, but feel free to hop over to our exhibit booth. As soon as this wraps up, we're going to go into, you can click there and see us and you can ask us some detailed questions. Jenna and Jessica, always a pleasure to be with y'all. Thank you for sharing with us. And Ellie, we'll let you wrap us up.
Thank you, Jason, Jessica, and Jenna for your time and sharing your experience with all of us today. Thank you to all of our attendees who joined. Again, this session was recorded and will be available on the event site tomorrow. Like Jason said, I know there were a lot of questions that we didn't get to, so please visit YGM's virtual booth to continue the conversation. You can find their page under the sponsors and exhibitors tab on the left-hand side of the event platform. The next Partner Solutions session begins at 2:30. Thank you all for joining.